Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail, and today's case takes us back to the Appalachian Trail, or AT. Now for those that aren't familiar with it, it is a 2,200 mile long trail, or 3,500 kilometers. It's a national scenic trail, generally referred to as the AT, highly marked, and it goes between Springer Mountain in Georgia and Mount Katahdin in Maine, passing through 14 various states. The idea for the trail started in 1921 and it was completed in 1937. It's maintained by a bunch of different trail clubs and managed by the National Park Service, the United States Forest Service, and the nonprofit Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Now, before we get started with this case, there's a guy named Bill Byronson. He wrote a book in 1997 called A Walk in the Woods. And when he quoted in it, if you were to draw a 2,000 mile long line across America, you would be bound to come across at least a dozen murder victims. And the reason I say that is because, millions of people hike this trail every year. So even though today's case, we're going to be talking about a tragic case, it's still a relatively safe trail to hike, and I'm not trying to fearmonger in any way, but this is part of a series of cases that I've covered along the Appalachian Trail. Now, today's case, we are going to be talking about Jeffrey Hood, who was 26 at the time, from Signal Mountain, Tennessee, and Molly LaRue. She was 25 at the time, and she was from Shaker Heights, Ohio. And they had met in Salina, Kansas, at some kind of church-sponsored volunteer program for young people. Molly and Jeff had both loved the outdoors, and at the time after they met, they did decide that they were going to get married. But before they got married, they wanted to share this ultimate adventure. Now, apparently Molly was a very social, athletic, even very artistic. In 1984, she participated in a nationwide contest that helped design the new postage stamp. Jeffrey was kind of the opposite of Molly. He was calm and mostly kept to himself. Molly had graduated magna cum laude in art of 1987, whereas Jeff graduated with a degree in teaching in 1989 from the University of Tennessee. The two had been working at a therapeutic wilderness program called Passport for Adventure, which was in Salina, Kansas. That's the program where I said they met. And it was a program that helping troubled teenagers by taking them out on camping trips and things like that into the wilderness, hiking. And when Jeff and Molly decided to go on their AT adventure, they decided that they were going to start up in Maine at Katahdin and head south. Now, this was in September of 1990, and they were not looking to, score any record-breaking deals. They were just trying to go out and enjoy the scenery. They weren't the type of campers and hikers that get up at the crack of dawn. They were just out there enjoying the trail, dealing with all the trail has to offer, the aches and pains, the beauty. The first week ended and they were feeling a little discouraged, but they thought, well, this is our first week, we're going to have some more challenges. And Molly had been keeping a journal, and she quoted, well, we were reminded one another that before we started this ordeal that there would be tough days, and we asked ourselves, why were we doing this? Well, we had one of those days, but at this time it went on and they became more positive. And another entry, Molly wrote, we both felt good as we went to bed. Maybe we'll get this trail done after all. So it had started out rough, but it was getting better as they were moving on. Now, this trip had started on June 3rd of 1990, but then on September 11th of 1990, they had been hiked into the Duncannon area of Pennsylvania, which is just a small town on the Susquehanna River, pictured here. And they decided that they were going to take a 0-day night, get some rest, and they stayed at a hotel called the Doyle Hotel, pictured here. And this is roughly at the halfway mark on the trail. It's important to note, too, that on the Appalachian Trail, there are a bunch of little huts or shelters, if you will, roughly 240 of them, and people can either sleep in their tents or some people decide to sleep in these communal trail shelters. And these two, they had been sleeping mostly in their tents, but occasionally using the shelters as well. And then when they needed to resupply, they would stay in a small town right off the trail like this one get their food and get back on trail. So on September 12th, 1990, they headed back onto the trail, making as far as the Thelma Marks Shelter, which is near the top of Cove Mountain. This is the particular shelter. It's just a three-sided lean-to. This one's around 30 feet from the trail and just surrounded by a bunch of trees. And they went to bed that night without a care in the world. And unfortunately, this is where everything just went to hell. On September 13th, two other hikers, Cindy and Brian, otherwise known as the Lone Moccasins, that was their trail names, they were both hiking the trail themselves, and they were looking for a shelter that evening, and they were the ones that discovered the remains, and it was just a horrible crime scene. The couple, I can't even imagine what it would have been like coming up on this scene, because what they reported was just absolutely awful. According to what Mr. Bowen said, he became uneasy and sensed something was wrong before they even got up to the shelter. And he had brought up his walking stick because, he thought he might have to get into a fight. And when he got closer, he noticed the food and equipment were scattered all over the place. And that's when he saw the remains of Geoff and Molly. He said it was just an awful, awful sight. Molly had been bound and stabbed. Jeffrey had obviously been shot several times, and he just said it was awful. So, of course, they hurried back down to Duncannon as fast as they could to report this crime, and the police got back and found the bodies just like the couple had reported, and it was just an awful scene. And I can't go into the detail here just because it was just absolutely brutal. And they started doing their forensic evidence, and they could tell now that the couple had been dead for about 12 to 16 hours, which meant whoever did this had a long head start. But the investigators got to work right away questioning residents living along and near the trail. They gathered enough information from various people there and other hikers to generate a sketch of the perpetrator. And he was described as a scruffy-looking white male carrying 2 red gym bags. And, of course, they had the grim task of having to contact the parents, and Molly and Geoff's parents both said that they were prepared for bears and snakes, all kinds of wildlife, everything. So they quote, they didn't know their worst enemy would be man. And it's just so sad because, the whole Appalachian Trail community was outraged by this because, it's considered a sacred place and millions of people travel a year, and this was just horrendous crime. Now, on September 21st, 2 hikers saw another hiker on the AT that was wearing Jeffrey's backpack and boots, and they immediately reported him to the National Park Service, and he was apprehended as he was trying to cross into Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, around 8 p.m. Now, he was arrested and confirmed that he was wearing Jeffrey Hood's backpack and boots, and he was also carrying the murder weapons, which was a knife and a Winchester pistol. So he was pretty much caught red-handed. He told the authorities that his name was David Casey Horn. He was a 38-year-old tobacco worker from Loris, South Carolina, but apparently his name sent up a red flag to the Florida FBI agent who actually stumbled across the case in a local paper, and he had been looking for this guy, Paul David Cruz, a 38-year-old fugitive who became a drifter and was a transient after being convicted and indicted for another murder in Bartlow, Florida, July 1986. He had been indicted by a Polk County grand jury in Florida for murder in 1986 of Arnold, and he had just disappeared, and they had him on the most wanted list in their state all this time. And they had finally, when the FBI agent saw this, he put the connection together, and they went up, and the Pennsylvania authorities were the ones that were able to arrest him, and he was immediately tried for the murders of Geoff and Molly. The Perry County prosecutor, R. Scott Kramer, was after the death penalty, but it didn't provide any comfort for the families of the victim. They wanted him to be in prison because Molly's father was a former Baptist minister, and they said that the death penalty wouldn't bring his daughter back. they said, quote, despite having a lot of anger about her loss, but putting someone else to death doesn't even come close to dealing with the pain, end quote. So they wanted for life in prison. And of course, the news of Cruz's capture was relieving for all the other hikers that knew about this and all the trail officials that were out there trying to find him. And once he was captured, more came to light about his strange behavior since he was back in the military. Things had gone downhill and just all this stuff that I'm not going to get into because it's just, I mean, he was just a bad guy that just chose to do a lot of bad things in his life. Now, the trial started on May 15th, 1991. Of course, the defense blamed, drugs and alcohol and other things like that. But the prosecution was able to just show an amazing amount of information. They called witnesses who had seen him on the trail during the days before and after the couple's remains had been discovered. The witnesses were able to identify Cruz from photographs that were presented by investigators, which included trail staff, a cable television contractor, other hikers. Later, the lab tests showed that the blood samples from Cruz had the similar genetic makeup to genetic material recovered from Molly's body, as well as the bullets taken from Geoff. They matched the pistol that was in Cruz's possession at the time he was taken into custody. The prosecution actually called Karen Cruz, his ex-wife, to testify, and she said she didn't believe the alcohol and drug story affected him. She said that he could drink 2 quarts of moonshine and still be straight. She said that he was just a mean guy. He was just a weird guy that liked to hurt other people. And jurors decided on the death sentence because of the aggravating circumstances of the crime and all the evidence and just the violent nature of it. I mean, I can't get into it here, but I mean, Molly was tortured beforehand, and it was just, just awful. And so between May 91 and December of 2006, he continued to fight his case and make appeals in the state Supreme Court, the U.S. Third District Court, and the Third Circuit Court. The Perry County prosecutors finally decided that they would stop fighting the appeals, and then on December 26th of 2006, his sentence was reduced to 2 back-to-back life sentences without the possibility of parole in state prison. And they made that deal because Perry County is a small county. They didn't think they had the funds to keep fighting the appeals, and they were worried if it went back to trial, which it could have, things could have fallen apart, and the families were content with him being in prison for the rest of his life, which personally I agree with. He should never get out because, as we've seen in the past, when these people get out, they just go back and do it again. Not saying people can't be reformed, but in any event, as far as motive with this guy, they think that what happened was earlier on his hike, he was in the woods and he ran into Molly, and apparently she was friendly to him, offered him some food, and of course this guy, Cruz, was inexperienced and whatnot. Well then, right as he felt like he was flirting with her, well, unfortunately, that obviously wasn't the case, and Jeffrey came up, and when he saw Jeffrey, it's thought that he decided, well, he was going to come back and carry out this horrendous crime. And it's just an awful thing because, these two people, they were in love, they had just gotten engaged, and they were going to be celebrating their halfway point at Harper's Ferry with their families. Now, they had hinted to them about this engagement, but they were actually going to be talking about it at Harper's Ferry. They were going to be spending the weekend there, talking about the engagement, celebrating the halfway point. And, it was all just robbed from them because this one maniac decided that, I don't know, just these things absolutely drive me crazy. But he is in prison, rotting where he belongs, and this is just one of those tragic stories. And this wasn't the first time this man had done something like this. Like I said, back in 1986, the police had enough evidence to prove that he had murdered a woman that had given him a ride while he was hitchhiking. So apparently he was down in Florida somewhere. A woman had picked him up to give him a ride, and they're not sure what happened, but he took her life. So they never moved forward with that case. I mean, he was indicted with it, but since he's serving 2 full life sentences without the possibility of parole, they never moved forward with trial at that case. So In any event, today, that is the end of today's video. That is all the information. I will have links in the description and further reading if you choose to do so. And of course, I want to dedicate this video to Molly LaRue and Jeffrey Logan Hood, their friends, their family, everyone that knew them and went through this with them. They were such a beautiful young couple, and they were just starting their lives together. You know, they had just gotten engaged and they had all these plans, and they were taking this big adventure before starting their life together. And unfortunately, they had to meet up with this awful person, but thankfully he was found and he was put where he belongs. And I just hope that they're resting in peace and their families are moving on the best they can, and I pray for them. And thank you all for watching. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music, and I will see everybody in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I hope everyone's week is off to a good start. And I just wanted to let everyone know that, you know, some people get frustrated with me in these videos because I don't give all the details. And honestly, it's out of respect and also just because of the policies here on YouTube, and just trying to be respectful to both. And I always leave my sources in the description if you'd like to do further reading. In any event, these cases are always hard, and if you guys have any feedback or comments, of course I'd always love to hear from you. But during the holidays, it is a lot busier for me, so I am not able to respond to the comments as much as I normally would. That's just a temporary thing, but of course I love all your feedback and look forward to seeing and appreciate all your feedback and support. All of the calendars that have been bought have gone out. If you would like one, I'll have that info in the description. In any event, I always look forward to your comments. I love hearing from you guys. I love all your feedback, and it's just been a busy month. You know how it is around the holidays, so it's not that I don't want to respond back to you or can't. It's been a crazy month and a lot harder with things at work too. So I do apologize about not being able to.